This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 325 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast about what people think about Australia. Let me firstly pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, a very beautiful part of Australia where I am recording this podcast. So, of course, I am a born and bred Australian, and apart from about 6 years, I have spent my whole life in Australia. And I think it's kind of cool, but it is a bit different. It's kind of far away and a little bit quirky, and a lot of people don't make it here because it is, it's a far distance from most of the world. So I thought we would put together this episode about Australian ideas, Australian stereotypes. It kind of arose because over the last year or so, when I've been just chatting with various people for the podcast, we have happened to get onto the topic of what people think about Australians. So I have some great stories to share, from people who've spent significant time here or moved here, through to one who hasn't even been here but has still formed an impression of us Aussies, and I have found them all really interesting, so I wanted to share. First up, let me start though with my friend the Barefoot Backpacker's comments on my LinkedIn post, because, I did a bit of a shout out. What do people think about Australians? And Barefoot Backpacker had some interesting stereotypes to mention. And of course, stereotypes, I think, often include some facts behind them, and most of these, I think, are very reasonable assumptions from a middle-aged Brit who's visited Australia in the past. So the list includes beaches and barbecues, a dry sense of humour, alcohol to excess, mainly beer, sad but true, sports, all the sports, the main religion's central objects are ball-shaped, also true, everything is trying to kill you, even the things that aren't trying, including the weather. All manner of weird creatures. This is true. Hats, caps, headgear. Maybe no footwear. I mean, barefoot backpacker. This is perfect. General lack of stable governments. I mean, yes, okay. Over the last few years especially, we've had, it's been a bit better, but we've had quite a revolving door of prime ministers. I think that's partly to do with our political system, but yeah, okay, maybe true. Lots of soap operas, because I know we have exported, for example, Home and Away and Neighbours especially to Britain, but I think around the world, and they're very popular. About 6 actors who appear in every soap opera for the last 40 years. Yeah, maybe also true. Harold Holt. C, government, dry sense of humour. If you don't know about Harold Holt, you should probably Google, but this was a Prime Minister who drowned many years ago. And if you listen to our book club, also some years ago, about Bill Bryson's book about Australia, it opens by him noticing that Australia must be a kind of a weird place because we lost a Prime Minister. Anyway, Barefoot Backpacker goes on with this list. Somewhere very far away from anywhere, possibly including reality. Yeah, maybe. Desert. Lots of desert. Midnight Oil, great band. Bogans, yeah. A dodgy immigration policy, sad but true. Coral reefs and rainforests, and wine. So those are the stereotypes. And I have to say that's a pretty good summary of Australia and Australians, so I can't complain. Now, my first guest today who I'm speaking with is Michael Jensen. Michael spent some time in Australia on student exchange back in the early 1980s. Now, these days, Michael and his partner Brent are digital nomads. And late last year, Michael and Brent were spending a chunk of time in Australia. And I was really curious to know how he thought Australia had changed over those intervening decades.
So when I was 18 years old, I was lucky enough to be chosen to be an exchange student. Our sister cities were Lakewood, Colorado, and Sutherland Shire, Australia, which is in Sydney. So I came over here in 1982 at the age of 18, and I got to spend, I guess it was about 5 months here going to school and traveling around, New South Wales and Queensland, and spending a lot of time with Aussies, my friends from school, my Aussie parents. And I really got to be immersed in the culture, which is the whole point of an exchange program. And it was, like I said, it was 1982. It was can't remember exactly when Crocodile Dundee was, but it felt like Australia was kind of having a moment where it was becoming, more well known around the world. And that was when Men at Work was huge, and Midnight Oil, I think, came around that time. In Excess, I think they're Australian. Anyway, so Australia was becoming a bit more well known at that point in time, and it was really awesome and fun to get to be here. So flash forward now, it's 2023. I guess so it's been 42 years since I was living here. I've been here twice before in between, so I've seen a little bit, but it's been interesting to really think about, to get to spend a lot of time here, because I was back in Cronulla for a month, and then we've been up here in the Blue Mountains. So I feel like I've gotten to see Australia up close again, as much as I did back then. So how has Australia changed since then? First of all, the country is so much more diverse than it was in 1982. It's just amazing how that has changed. I took the train up to the Blue Mountains, and passing through Parramatta and Penrith, the train station there, it was like being in London. It was like, wait a minute, this is multicultural, and there's all people from all over from Southeast Asia, and it felt diverse in a really good, healthy way that it wasn't in 1982. And then it wasn't bad in 1982. It was just a different time and place. And unfortunately, that was the era that the Japanese were really coming into their own and becoming more rich and powerful. There was a fair bit of anti-Japanese sentiment in the country at the time. And so that was a bit weird and unsettling. So it was nice to be here and 40 years later and feel like it's so different, that the country has changed that way. And I've talked to a lot of Aussies about it, and my sense for the most part is that diversity has happened pretty well. It's been pretty seamless. It doesn't feel like there's been a lot of the negative backlash that I have seen in other countries where there's a lot of immigrants. Maybe I'm completely wrong about that, but that is the sense I've gotten about it. And maybe immigrants have been here long enough now that people are really starting to get integrated, because when we were in Cronulla, we'd be down at the local park swimming in the Gunnamatta Bay, and there would be school kids down for activities. And again, multicultural, all kinds of diversity. I saw a young a Muslim woman wearing the Islamic bathing costume, the burkini, I think they call it, something like that. And she's just playing with the other kids and just seemed to be part of the community, and in a really good way. So that seemed really positive. So Australia seems much more diverse in that sense. The country also feels more sophisticated than it was. And first of all, the whole world is more sophisticated than it was 40 years ago. And by sophisticated, I don't mean unworldly. It's not that Australia was unsophisticated. Well, I guess I'm saying it was sort of unsophisticated.
I don't think we were, though. Like, well, I don't feel offended when you say that about Australia in the 80s.
I just want to make sure I'm not saying it's unworldly, because Australians have been big travelers. I mean, forever. I mean, you see Australians around the world. It's not like Australians are people who stick into their own country and be like, we're afraid of the rest of the world. We're not going out and about. Australians are great travelers and open to all kinds of experiences. I think in the 80s, it was just a factor of being so far away from everything else. And there was no internet at that point. So I remember when I was here in 82, some big movie had come out in the States. I don't remember what it was. And I was asking my Australian friends if they'd seen it. And they're like, no, that's not going to be here for 6 months. And I'm sort of like,
exactly.
What are you talking about? That movie's not going to be here for 6 months. And, they explained movies don't come here for that length of time. So there was that separation that sort of had Australia. Australia felt in many ways 10 to 15 years behind the States in lots of things, fashions and music and television and just things in general. And being here now in 2023, it does not feel that way at all. I mean, the whole world is bound so much more tightly together, in large part because of the internet. We're all communicating with each other instantly. We have access to each other all the time. Jet travel is so much easier. So many more people come to Australia. Things come here so much more quickly. So Australia feels much more sophisticated in that sense, which I think is mostly a good thing. I think we all want to be more sophisticated. I think the downside of that sophistication is just a little tiny bit. Aussies are losing some of what makes them unique and distinctive. And one of the things I first noticed when I got here is that in my experience in Sydney and now up in the Blue Mountains is that good day, mate. Good day has just disappeared. And forgive my accent. I'm not trying to do an Aussie accent. I don't try and do that. But good day, you just don't hear it the way we did before. Everybody said it back in 1982 all the time. And now it's hello, hi, how are you doing? And I was immediately struck by that. And so I did some research and I actually read online. I watched some YouTube videos where people do say it is fading away. It sounds like it's still an older and a more rural thing. You'll hear it.
Mm-hmm.
But in Sydney, younger kids are like, I would only say that ironically to my mates. I would
Yeah,
only say
exactly.
that being said, the word mate still used all the time. I reckon, no worries, mate. You hear that all the time. I think Aussie slang, which I actually wrote an article about, is alive and well. But I do think some of that is slipping away. And I also think I've noticed things like milk bars, were just such a huge thing. I just noticed in Cronulla, there's one at the train station there. There's a milk bar. And I'm like, wait a minute, I haven't seen many other milk bars. And so that led me again to do some research and read a whole article about some guy coming back to Australia and saying, what happened to my beloved milk bars? They've been disappearing. It seems like the chain grocery stores have become more of a thing, the Coles and the Woolworths.
Yeah.
Back in 1982 in Cronulla, it was very much mom and pop. I mean, you just sort of walk into your little shop and buy what you needed and go home. And now I guess there's not a Coles in Cronulla, but there's definitely Woolworths and there's an IGA.
That's so true. It's very hard to find an independent, like a proper, we used to have all kinds of little ones around here too, and there's nothing. It's all Coles, Woolies, IGA.
Yeah, that's happened. On the other hand, you've kept Starbucks out, which I think is great. I mean, there's lots of local coffee chains, which is also a huge difference from before. It did not seem like coffee was nearly as big a deal. Maybe that's part of the sophistication. Now coffee is, such a big deal in Australia. And there are coffee shops, independent coffee shops all over the place, which has been really nice to see. Going back to the sophistication part, another thing I've noticed is that meat pies used to be very much just like a working man's lunch. You'd buy them at the milk bar, or there'd be like a meat pie at the beach shop. You'd pick up and you'd eat, and I'd do that after school. And now it's like at the pub I was at the other day, they had a meat pie, but it was like a really perfect golden, a fancy meat pie. It's like they've gone upscale. And in Laura, where we were staying with my Aussie mom, we got meat pie several times, and there's like a vegan meat pie, and there's like it was a chili vegan meat pie. And there's, a curried vegetable meat pie. There's all these different kinds of meat pies. So that has changed. And that, I think, speaks to sort of the sophistication of how it's changed. I guess another thing I would say is Aussies are much more self-confident about themselves and their place in the world. Because in 1982, it felt like I was exotic in Cronulla High School. It was like I was an American. And everybody just thought that was so interesting. And I was a 185 centimeter, 80 kilogram overweight American. I was not a cool American kid. I was not the sort of kid that would walk in and be like, hey, wow, I want to know this guy. But just being an American, gave me enough of a cachet that people were really, into talking to me. And some people all assumed I lived in Los Angeles. And I remember one classmate was convinced I'd met Madonna at some point. It was just a bit weird. And now Australia knows where it stands on the world stage. Australia knows everybody wants to come here, and it's famous for all kinds of different things now.
So interesting to hear what Michael thinks about how Australia has kind of matured over those decades. And I think, as we mentioned, the internet and availability of information and everything, globalization in general, has a lot to do with that, because Australia, when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, really did feel like a bit of a backwater. And it's different now, but yeah, mostly good different. Anyway, my next guest, like Michael, also came here to study, but more recently. Alex Zeringer came here to Australia for a semester abroad. In fact, I met him last year when he was a study abroad student at Murdoch University here in Perth, where I'm a casual lecturer. So he's now returned to Ireland. You can hear more about that in episode 322 about studying abroad. And then we chatted online, and I asked Alex to tell me his first impressions of Australia, and specifically my hometown of Perth.
My first impressions were it's hot. I arrived in February, and it was still around 30 degrees, I'd say. And it was in the evening, and I just left the Perth airport, and it was just really hot. And I came from winter, and but I knew it was the other way around. So I actually was looking forward to have a bit of good weather, hot temperatures, fun things to do outside. But my first impressions in general were, this is gonna be a fun time, I guess, because I just felt, how am I supposed to say this? But I really felt like positive, like good, like homey, like homey-ish, if that's even a word. But
makes sense.
I just felt like I felt like, oh yeah, I think settling in here won't take too long.
Yeah.
I just felt like I had a good thought of it, and I just think which I'm not used to those huge distances, and mostly having to rely on a car in Australia, I'd say, because I'm used to taking like public transport to get me from A to B, or just walking or whatever. And it took me a bit of quite some time from the airport towards my apartment in Perth, and everything was just so big, and the streets were so big, those big cars, my first impression was that Australia is not too different. I'd say you can just see the Western influence. Perth, I always called it pretty Perth. I felt like it could be probably even a big city here somewhere in Europe.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Oh, it totally makes sense. Yeah. And when I moved to Germany, because I'd lived in Japan first and then Bratislava, and then I moved to Germany, and I was actually kind of disappointed because Germany felt too much like home at first. And then I dug deeper, and of course it was really different, but like my impression was like, I totally know what you mean. It doesn't feel that different.
It's just warmer by size. Like your cities are much bigger, I'd say, and it just takes you much longer to get from A to B.
But it's a problem in Perth.
I really, really honestly enjoyed having beaches nearby, being able to just lay down, absorbing vitamin D, getting a bit of a tan. I just love taking the train and going to some beaches nearby and going for a swim, going for a hike. I really, really like this in Perth, because you can just do those things. I have to say, though, before coming to Australia, Amanda, I thought of the East Coast, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, because I think that's sometimes most of the city, most of the cities that people would talk about here.
Absolutely.
Where I'm from.
But you ended up in Perth. So yes, Alex did end up in Perth, and it seemed like he enjoyed it. So I'm glad for that. Now, my next guest is Julia Kaplan, and she has not yet been to Australia, but like many travellers, she has met many other Aussies who are travelling abroad. And we got to chatting about this last year sometime, and I was intrigued that she had really formed a pretty accurate idea of us without ever being here.
And what's so interesting about Australia is I have friends who have spent 1 month there, and they say it's not enough. And then I have friends who have spent a year traveling through Australia, and they still say, not enough, didn't see everything I wanted to. And I've never been to Australia, and I'm a little bit afraid, because what if I go and I just never come home because there's just more to see?
I mean, there could be worse things than ending up in Australia forever, but No. But your family might say, hey, where are you? And I think that is the thing about Australia, because it's vast and enormous, and everything is far apart. And when you get there, you want to spend like quite some time there. There's and I think you get the kind of, especially if you're doing the lap and out in, kind of the real outback areas and stuff, you get a kind of relaxed vibe, and you don't want to hurry anything.
And I think that ties into a lot of the Australian people that I've met in my travels as well, where I think maybe it's my kind of United States city upbringing, but I'm very much a type A, go, 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 go type girl. And when I've met Australians, and I don't want to generalize people from a country, but in general, they tend to breathe a little bit more fully than I do. And they tend to be more relaxed and enjoy. And there's no rush, because you can always do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I've learned a lot from the Australians that I've met along the way.
Yeah, I think we do have that general, as a stereotype, it's probably pretty accurate. And even, the way we like to travel, because, compared to in the US, if you're, working in a corporate job, and your annual holiday entitlement is pretty small often. And here, we'll always have at least 4 weeks off every year. And then we have long service leave where you can have, 3 months off at once. And we like to take time off. So I think that kind of feeds into that as well.
Yeah. And I think it takes, especially when you meet Australians in North America or in Europe, it just takes so long to get to these parts of the world that often you meet them traveling for months on end. And with that, you're able to take your time versus kind of my American counterparts that have only 14 days. Go, 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 go. Versus if you have a longer stretch of time, you don't have to rest.
Yeah, I think she's spot on. Now, my final guest today is my friend Jules Park, who migrated from South Korea to Australia. And the differences that she found between South Korea and Australia are very telling. I think they tell us a lot about Australia, I think. So Jules initially came here on a working holiday visa and liked the lifestyle on the Gold Coast, and she stayed to study a master's degree in accounting and has decided to stay here probably forever, I think, and now lives in Sydney. Now, a quick apology, there are some background noises from her apartment neighbours doing renovations, so I'm sorry about that. But I asked Jules about her decision to stay in Australia.
I think I knew like instantly, like within a year of being in Australia, I felt so much happier. Yeah, just felt free. Yeah, felt like more, definitely felt more freedom. Because in Korea, there are like certain way of life people expect you to live. Like at certain age, you need to do this. At certain age, like I mean, like at certain age, you need to go to uni, and then you need to get a job, and then you need to meet your like husband and marry, and then you need to have first baby, and then after first baby, people started asking, "Oh, when's your second one?" And then you need to have a second baby, something like that.
Yeah.
It's just people don't really like color in Korea. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They like all the same. That's not wrong, but for some people it could be good.
Mm.
Like yeah, it could be good, but it's just not right for me. It didn't make me happy. Yeah, I couldn't really live happy life there. So like within the first year of moving to Australia, um, I felt that I'm much happier. After like I started working at that first full-time job at the auditing firm, there was so many cultural shock I experienced. So it was like my second or third day. So the working hour, the contracted hour was from 8:30 to 5 with 1 hour lunch break. And at 5 p.m., like me being Korean, I just can't go home. I feel pressure where no one gave me, no one gave me pressure, but I just felt pressure myself that, oh, maybe I should stay back because I'm new and stuff, learn stuff. And then my boss stood up from his desk at 5 sharp and then told everyone, like our like new graduate, oh, you can go home, it's 5. And then I'm like, oh my God, really? But now I know it's not for everyone in Australia. It was that that boss, because I experienced differently in Sydney.
Right.
But at the time, I'm like, oh my God, Australia is disciplined.
It's an amazing place.
It's so shocking because that's not going to happen in Korea at all.
Ever, yeah.
Yeah, no one goes on time. You have to show up on time in the morning, but you can't go home on. It was very, very good shock. And another thing, like just a little thing, kind of thing is like some people dye their hair pink and it's fine. It's just not fine. Like you can't like dye your hair pink and expect to work at an office.
I remember even when I lived in Japan, some of my students who were looking for office work jobs, they would have had their hair dyed, but not pink, just like dyed like my color, like a lighter brown or something. But then when they were going for job interviews, they had to dye it back black to be their, natural color, because otherwise they said they wouldn't get a job. And I was like, wow, like you still look really professional and normal, but yeah, they said, no, I'll never get a job if I don't have natural hair.
You are expected to have like black or brown, like dark brown hair. If you have like too bright brown or blonde hair, blonde, no way.
No chance.
Maybe brown's fine, but like blonde, no way.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
And definitely not pink.
No. Not even office. Like if you have a pink hair and walk on the street, everyone will look at you.
Wow.
Yeah, everyone will look at you. Yeah,
amazing.
So it's a bit hard. And another culture different, and it was a shock as a girl because I had a another workmate. She was like 20 something lady. She said she started going out with this guy, and then, oh, that's nice, that's nice. And then after like 3 months, she said, oh, I'm pregnant. And then everyone was like, oh, congratulations. In Korea, like, no way. I'm married.
There would be no congratulations in the office for that.
You can't say that. Like, you can't say like you're pregnant if you're not married,
Wow.
or at least like your wedding is already planned.
Yeah.
And many girls are saying, "Oh, I'm moving in with him, moving in with my boyfriend." It's just very awkwardly at the office, and everyone is like, "Oh, congratulations!" In Korea, you are not married, and you are dating with this guy, and you are saying, "Oh, we are moving in together." You can't really say it openly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of taboo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Wow.
it was a culture shock. I mean, now I'm used to it and very comfortable, but back then, wow.
So quite a few differences there that really highlight our pretty laid-back nature in Australia. But, you know, it's still possible to get pretty stressed out here. We're not just lying on the beach the whole time. We still have normal stresses and normal parts of life to deal with. But anyway, I found this really interesting to hear so many different opinions about what Australia and Australians are like, and I hope you did too. So thank you so much for listening to episode 325 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. A big shout out to my guests. Thank you very much to Michael from Brent and Michael Are Going Places. You can find out more about them at brentandmichaelaregoingplaces.com. Also, big thanks to Alex Zeringer, and I have left his LinkedIn connection in the show notes. Also, Julia Kaplan. Thank you, Julie, and her website is juliekaplan.com. And finally, you can find Jules online at Instagram or TikTok. Just look for Amazing Sydney Life and see the fabulous content she creates. Don't forget to come and join our Facebook group either at LinkedIn, notaballerina.com/LinkedIn. We'll redirect you directly there, or search for Thoughtful Travellers in Facebook as well. And our newsletter is at thoughtfultravel.substack.com. All of these links and more will be in the show notes at notaballerina.com/325. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.